when our next guest joined me in studio last year, he predicted that we would have to learn to live with COVID. And indeed, I think we have, as indeed he had to, having contracted the virus last December. But if, as Professor Luke O'Neill, the self-styled metabolic, says that COVID is like a deck of cards that keeps getting reshuffled, what lies ahead? Luke, up you come. You're very welcome back.
Thank you, Dearbhail.
Now, you got COVID last December. Was that kind of fascinating because your body turned into a wee sort of like personal scientific lab for you?
Absolutely, yes. It was amazing. So, how many people here have had COVID? How many have had it? Look at that.
See,
amazing.
More people
you know
than
that
not.
when the little red line comes up, you go, oh God, the red lines come up. And I didn't think those devices would work, kind of, little plasticky things, you know. There it was, the red line came up,
and
even
all the
for me,
saying,
you know.
Twins.
No. I had no symptoms. Well, that's right, exactly. Yeah.
I haven't yet had it.
Yeah, we need your DNA, Dearbhail.
But this is it, you can put...
You're innately resistant.
And this morning I did an antigen test, and I was sitting there, like, you know, whatever, 5:30 or 6 in the morning saying, does anyone even do this, anymore? But it's absolutely. What was it like for you, the experience? Was it a colleague or something that had?
Yeah, about 4 days before I was in a meeting, just a regular meeting in Trinity. It was a PhD examination, actually, face to face, which is good. And one of the examiners tested positive, and he emailed me, I'm positive. And then the HSE were contacted. Next, I get an email from the HSE. No symptoms, did my test, came up. The symptoms began maybe a day later, sniffles and coughs and so on. But it was very mild, thankfully. You know. Yeah. The vaccine saved me. But I could feel the vaccine working in my body, you see. Yeah. So that was amazing. And then by day 5, I'm negative on the test. That was pretty standard, it was fine. And yet again, I decided to disclose this to the media, much to my wife's annoyance, of course. Showing off again, she said.
But actually it's important for people to share their experience.
Take the test. If I'd gone to work that day, I could have infected 4 or 5, 6 people, you see. So my message was just take the test. If you're positive, stay home. It was as simple as that.
If you look across to Beijing, you look at Shanghai, and people just crying out to get food delivered and everything, and obviously numbers are increasing there. We are, sadly, Owen, I think we have to say that we're not exactly out of the woods yet with this.
Well, thank God we didn't go for zero COVID here. That was a stupid idea, I think, right? And China revealed that. The reason why it's so bad there is that zero COVID policy means nobody is really... and the vaccine, the Sinovac vaccine is not very good. They used the wrong vaccine in China. They applied this really stringent lockdown, and people couldn't build up natural immunity. And now, because of the Omicron variant, now it's rampant and there's all kinds of problems. So it's a good example of how we got it right, actually, in Ireland. And I think if we'd gone for zero COVID, or tried to do it, even though there was all kinds of issues with the border, that wouldn't have worked really, you know.
And yet there was a lot of passionate argument and sincerely held views. And
well, there was great grounds scientifically for it.
We were looking at New Zealand saying, look...
Yeah, but that's an island, remember? Yeah. There was good scientific and medical reasons for it, but it wasn't achievable. You would have had to repress the country so massively. And there was a great thing yesterday, I read this Barrington Declaration. Do you remember this idea?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That was wrong as well. The modelling of that would have been disastrous. You can't protect the vulnerable, really. So what we did, actually, in many European countries, we got it right. We did, it wasn't ideal, obviously, but we managed to get through it in a reasonable way.
Compared to the Spanish flu, like everyone kind of says, oh, it just hung around for 3 years and then it sort of siphoned itself off. Where are we in respect to, I didn't think we would be going into, like I actually lost track of what happened in 2021. It's sort of, it all blurred. But how does it compare to, I suppose, the previous big pandemic that
There's a great phrase in Ireland, it hasn't gone away, you know.
Yeah.
No other country does that phrase resonate so strongly as in Ireland. That Spanish flu kept going, you know. It re-emerged in 1959. It mutated. It was still there, right? And it came back maybe 3 times afterwards, you see. Why didn't it cause disease? Immunity had built up in response. Well, no vaccines, so natural immunity. And the history of infectious diseases is they always crop up all through our history. This is a new one, remember. It's a bit like TB. Remember, TB jumped from cattle into humans maybe about 1,500 years ago, and now TB was a disease. The Black Death came from fleas into humans, and now this one. So we're well used to seeing infectious diseases emerge, and the big question is what happens to them? Without vaccines, a lot of people die, and then the ones who are resistant survive, and then naturally your immune system evolved to protect you, and that's what happens really. We have vaccines, of course.
Did the show of hands surprise you at all? Just put your hands up again, who has had, or if you're happy to share it. Does that show of hands surprise you?
No, I think everybody must have had it. Even you might have had it there. You don't even know it. You know, 'cause
No, I did the
no
antibodies
symptoms.
test, not yet. And I'm sure I have actually, maybe at some point, and maybe didn't even know. It's kind of funny. This morning I opened up Twitter and I saw two things that struck my eyes. One was gas prices, so I shut that down. And the second was human bird flu had been reported by China, and I just thought, not now, not now. But these things are evolving all of the time. It's I suppose, a permanent threat that maybe we were, I suppose, apart from maybe SARS and MERS, kind of didn't really reach us.
Yeah, the surprise was it was a coronavirus. We thought it'd be flu. That was the prediction. The big pandemic would be flu. And it was this coronavirus, which nobody really expected, except for I knew some of these coronavirus experts. And you'd meet them at conferences, and they were a minority. Nobody worked on coronaviruses, really. It was a very rare thing.
These are virus hunter people who go into caves and stuff.
Yeah, and then it was a coronavirus out of the blue. This thing jumped from a bat into another animal, as we all know.
Or do we know?
Now.
Do we know?
Well, the closest relative is in a bat, so probably it came from a bat.
Yeah. Is it worrying that we haven't really been able to definitively source that? The World Health Organization hasn't been able to definitively source the origins of this?
It's only a worry because if we knew we could prevent it happening again, you see. So if it was a lab spill, that's a good scenario. Yeah. That's a rare event and you keep the labs in better order. If it's a natural thing, the question is, could it happen again? Now, don't worry about that for the moment, right?
Yeah. You're grand, Owen. You're grand.
Because it's a very rare event. Probably 7 things have to go wrong. I'm just picking that number randomly. My analogy is like Titanic. For Titanic to sink, 7 things had to go wrong. You know, they hit the iceberg on the side, the rivets weren't strong enough, all those combined, the ship sinks. This is similar. It must have gone into someone who was very immunosuppressed and grew in that person's body to a high level, and then someone else got, and then it begins. You know, so it's very hard to predict, really. But we're pretty confident it probably, well, we hope it won't be another one, a brand new pandemic. We're more concerned, and this is our worries now, you ready? So if you're a leader, you face these head on, okay? You don't shy away from them. The best analogy I have is like wolves. You know the way in our lives, there's all these wolves circling. One comes in, you feed that wolf and it goes away, right? And you forget about him. He's still on the outside. A new wolf comes in. The COVID-19 wolf is on the outside at the moment, right? The question is, will it come back in again? It's still there. And it will come back in. There's no question, by the way, right? But the good news is we know what to do. We've learned so much about this virus, all this research, all this science that's happened. We know how to prepare for the surge that's coming in the autumn, you see. And then we prepare people for that, and then we don't worry about it too much.
Well, what about that aspect, which is, you know, human behaviour? Because obviously we've moved from rules into guidance. And Ireland, I think, had been able to distinguish itself. We were, you know, apart from a few protests and, you know, anger, but largely there was huge solidarity. I wonder, is that because we're a smaller country and, you know, we were much more personally affected. We knew people who had it. Sadly, many of us knew people who had passed away, you know, by or with COVID. We've now moved into this rules kind of versus guidance stage. And for me, what's been really fascinating is the people who wear masks are people like me who haven't had it yet. I think everyone else is just like, you know, they're a little bit more, or perhaps less guarded. But like when I was flying recently, I'm wearing my FFP2 and you're looking around you, people have sort of abandoned them in settings, even where they might still be required, whether it's on the tube or, you know, in public transport. How important is it for those measures to stay there, or how is our human behaviour changing towards it? Obviously, it's less of a threat for us. We wouldn't be here today otherwise.
Yeah, the mask issue is really tricky, isn't it? I wear a mask on public transport still. I was on a flight to London yesterday, or on Monday, wore a mask, you know. So. And
were many people in the airport?
No, hardly anybody. I mean, it was a good sign, by the way. Dublin Airport was packed. I've never seen it so crowded, and I was happy with that kind of, you know. Yeah. But nobody's wearing masks. I mean, it's very hard to implement that, isn't it? Nobody wants to wear them anyway, you know. Now, remember, masks aren't a medical, scientific solution necessarily. The vaccine is, and the therapies are. They're the ones to focus on. And when I said earlier, we know what to do, you've got to give credit, remember, to the scientists, really. And I am one myself, so I'm biased. The scientists have got us out of this with the vaccines. Yeah. And remember, that's going to be the case. There's new vaccines coming. There's grounds for huge optimism because of science, always. That was always my approach. There's 130 vaccines in development. 4 of them look fantastic to me. One, the US Army are leading the world now at the next best vaccine, amazing. The US Army, by the way, have a massive research institute in America. It's called the Walter Reed. They've devised what could be the universal vaccine against every coronavirus. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We're going to get data on that in the next week or two. If that vaccine works, that's the definite way out. And when we come to the autumn, give everybody who's vulnerable that vaccine. And now confidence comes back massively.
Well, let's talk about that, because even when Owen was talking about the scenario planning, one of the things will be, we've a winter surge with common flu anyway. What is the winter surge likely to look like? Will it lead to, like, obviously booster vaccines, I presume?
Yep.
I know obviously being targeted at the older population now, but will we see ourselves lining back up to get a vaccine? And could we see the reintroduction of the form of restrictions, perhaps not as bad as before, but maybe masks, maybe, you know, some of those mandates that were in place?
The most important, I guess, for this sector and every sector is to give people confidence as to what's going to happen. So leadership, as I said, is the key thing. And the leaders of our country hopefully will say, this is what's going to happen in the autumn, right? Now, scientifically, what has to happen is a booster campaign for the older and vulnerable. Not everybody, over 60s is sensible. Give them the booster. That will work, you know. Great study yesterday in Nature Medicine. The 4 doses of vaccine are giving massive protection, as we did with 350,000 people. So we know the boosters will work. If a new vaccine comes along, use that. That'll really work very well. So that's the first thing.
For the whole population, or just?
No, over 60s.
Over 60s.
If you're young, it's a benign disease, largely. Now, there are some young people get badly affected, of course they do. But overall, the over 60s are the ones to protect anyway, you see. The second big issue is ventilation. We know that mitigates. This is an airborne disease. If it was waterborne, we'd clean the water, wouldn't we, right? Let's clean the air everywhere. I would invest in ventilation, and that gives confidence as well. That keeps the thing under control too. They're 2 of the big things. The third is, of course, new therapies are there. Paxlovid is a fantastic add-on. It's a bit slow because they're still getting used to it. There's some what are called contraindications with other drugs, and that can be a problem. So it's not coming out immediately. But eventually, you should go to your pharmacy and take an antiviral. That'll come as well. And by the time we get to September, October, I'm hoping all 3 of those are in place, and therefore we don't see this massive increase in hospitalisations. So we can be confident of that.
So if you were Taoiseach for the winter surge, what would you ditch and what needs to stay?
Well, well, as I said, if I was the Taoiseach, that's a terrifying prospect.
Mad thought.
We've got 2 Taoiseachs, haven't we? I think already.
Rotating. You can always add in a third.
Well, as you know, I'm now on the new advisory group, which is quite nice in a way, right? And what the Minister for Health...
Are they calling it NEFIT NUA?
I wouldn't call it NEFIT. No. NEFIT was just public health, and this is a bit broader. Public health is part of it, of course, you know. But the Minister for Health rang me. I was away, actually. I was in Bratislava, and he rings me. And he says, well, I join it. And he said something great, I thought. He said, I want this to be the best advisory group in the world. First in class, best in class is the phrase he used. Now, it sounds a bit like, oh, we're going for it, aren't we? You know, why shouldn't everything in Ireland be best in class? You know, and it's great, and we're going to advise now on this and provide our opinion. Is it on the current, or is it on future? The whole lot. Yeah, in other words, everything about this pandemic and future coronaviruses. Our job is to advise the Minister for Health on what Ireland should do. And it's these kinds of things, and the advice will be along the lines I've been saying, you know. And we know these things will work, remember. And if we tell the general public and any prospective tourists coming into Ireland, we've got the best system in Ireland to make sure you don't get sick when you're here, you know, that'll be a really positive message to send out, and we could use it as part of our marketing campaign. Yeah. There's all kinds of ways we can build confidence.
Obviously, science and scientists came to the fore, but one of the sort of more neglected parts of our medical profession had been our public health doctors, many of them who didn't even have consultant status. But do you think that this crisis has really brought to the fore the importance of public health? But just, you know, which is often maybe just the community things, just vaccines, kids, whatever. But just even the fact that a lot of them didn't even have the same status, and actually we relied on them so much.
Sadly, it was the poor relation among the specialties, you see. That's changed now, hasn't it, for heaven's sake? Yeah. You know, we now know how important public health is. And again, I know the Department of Health is under pressure for all kinds of things. We've got to make sure we have great public health here, because this will still be here in the autumn. It'll still be here forever, sadly. I hate to say it. It's a new virus. It's now jumped into us humans. It'll be like other infectious diseases, and we live with it, and we learn how to control it and get less fearful of it. That's the key word I would use, phrase I would use.
What are your thoughts, and maybe it's a little bit unfair because you've just gone on to a new government advisory group, but what are your thoughts on the relationship between the medical and political wings of the state, I guess, you know, in the wake of COVID? What did we learn? Obviously, science and, you know, the chief medical officer, it was our public health, they were to the fore at the very, very beginning. And since then, there has this been kind of big debate, well, who was really in control, who was running it? How important was it, certainly in that first phase, for medicine and science to be out in front?
Well, we love a good fight, don't we?
We do.
You know, start with that, or a good bit of argy-bargy. it was amazing that doctors came to the fore in that way. It was an emergency, you know. The government will use advisors, be they economists or doctors or whoever, you know. It just happened to be their time in a sense, you know, and it was very effective. Overall, I think Ireland, never forget Ireland did very well here now. I reckon we're number 3 in Europe by some metrics, which is great, you know. The excess death rate's the key one to look at, by the way. How many extra people died? We're very good on that table, you know, we're really high up there.
So you think when history recalls how various countries dealt with it, like we look across to our closest neighbour, to the UK, and the excess deaths there and the deaths from COVID, and you look to, you know, it's kind of fascinating. You look to the UK, you look to the US, you look to some of the most mature and wealthy democracies, and they did not do as well as some of the poorer and more developing.
Well, it's startling in America now, I think, in my opinion, because 1 million people have died of this virus in America. At least 2/3 of those deaths were preventable. Such a shameful number to state, right? And the reason is they didn't observe the guidelines necessarily. The vaccination campaign was slow, anti-vax sentiment, all those things combined to allow 1 million people to die. And those are preventable deaths, you see. We didn't have that here. Many of our people did not die because the Irish people responded so fantastically well. I think a big credit here, by the way, to our education system. Because we teach science up to the age of 15, 16 here, you see. That's a wonderful thing. You're not teaching them to be scientists. You're teaching them how to interrogate a complex problem scientifically. And when the information on the vaccines came out, people made their own minds up based on that. We have a 97% vaccine rate. We can be very proud of that and proud of our teachers, actually, because the education system made sure we have a democratically competent, highly educated people who could, this is very complicated, they could address that complexity and agree to take the vaccine. And that's something very proud of, I think.
What do we need to do to prepare for the next big one? Because obviously just these pandemics or outbreaks, whether it's MERS or SARS, which I remember, and if anyone remembers, it was the time of the Special Olympics, when Ireland hosted the Special Olympics, and that was one of the issues that prevailed at the time. But it seems, or perhaps I'm wrong, but it seems as if they're sort of getting closer in proximity. So what do we need to do to prepare for the next public health crisis, whether it's MERS, SARS or coronavirus or something else?
Well, again, you can't beat the scientists in a sense, because they're the ones on the ground trying to spot this next one and predict it. We've got a great bat expert, by the way, in UCD called Emma Teeling. She is on a very important international panel trying to predict the next jump from a bat into a human. So the scientists are all over this, watching it, and that's why people need not worry, but it's our job in a sense. So you guys, it's a wolf that's well away from you guys in a sense. You know, I worry about that wolf. You don't need to. You know, keep an eye on that wolf and prepare for that. And the way out of that will be the universal vaccine, because the universal vaccine will protect against any coronavirus. There's hundreds in bats, and one of them might jump. We'll have a vaccine ready, you see, if the next one should happen, and stop the devastation that happened during this pandemic. So again, as ever, huge amount of science, a lot of knowledge, and we know what to do. And I can't really downplay the importance of research and scientific work. And I want to give a plug to Colin, by the way, sitting here, because we have a centre in Trinity. Oh, many labs are working on it. In Trinity, we got a centre on COVID. There's 15 labs. AIB gave us some sponsorship. So again, all these labs are working on COVID the whole time. The other concern, of course, we have, what I'm at it, is long COVID. Remember, that's in the back of our minds. Yep. How serious is that? If that's 10% of people, that's a problem. And that'll affect any industry, including tourism. There's huge research into treating long COVID, diagnosing it, and all these labs are working on that as well. So again, I would say the next year or so, this frenzy of research will continue. And it will deliver, remember. So therefore, people shouldn't be that worried and being kept awake at night about the next one, because we're on top of that, hopefully, and we can predict it.
You can't put a price on a human life, and obviously, but we can put a potential price on what long COVID might look like if it's 10% of the workforce. Do you think that the Irish government got it right in terms of that horrific balance of trying to manage up all of those factors, including the economic costs, the human costs? Do you think history will think that we didn't do too bad?
Well, it was an impossible task in many ways, wasn't it? How do you keep the economy going in this emergency? Because it's very important, that isn't it? For obvious reasons. They got the balance right. Very difficult. You might have tweaked it here and there, but overall the balance was good, I think. And now that we're coming out of it, we can look back on that with some level of pride. And we heard about how the tourism sector was supported. It wasn't ideal, obviously. There was lots of arguments back and forth, but overall we've come through it, haven't we? We hope, you know. Yeah. So overall, I think our government's done very well.
And you're back out travelling internationally again?
I am.
You are? How's that been?
Very strange. Yes, so I've got a big trip coming. You hear this now. It's all science now, remember. I'm going to Cancun in Mexico.
Per you.
We go to the worst places.
A business trip.
and that's a cardiovascular conference. Can you believe it? So this morning I went on Skyscanner. I booked my own flights, by the way, on Skyscanner. I got a €785 flight to Cancun. Then I go to Rhode Island for a second conference. It's a bit of a tour. Then I'm in Oxford for the third part, right? And I've booked all my tickets and off I go. Now it's going to be strikingly exciting for me to meet people again.
Test before you go to the US?
Well, now that's the big beef we have, by the way. Let's hope they stop this antigen test with the US soon. Because there's no scientific basis.
You might be stuck in Cancun.
I could get stuck in Cancun because I've got a test there to get to America, you know. And I do think it's a serious thing. I think Owen mentioned it. I mean, it's a very serious disincentive, remember, especially for Americans coming here. So we've got to press them to get rid of the antigen test to get in out of America. It's a very important one.
Well, if I hear that you're tragically stuck in Cancun,
that's right.
unable to get in, I'll get out my violin and play a small little tune for you. As always, Luke, absolutely fantastic to chat to you. Everyone, Professor Luke O'Neill.
Thank you very much.